Welcome back, everyone. Craig here. Jonah couldn't make it, or he may surprise us a little bit later, but it's just me today. And I'm interviewing David from the CVS podcast. I was actually on David's show a few months ago back in September, and it was more about sort of our podcast, but in talking to David, um, he talked about some things that I was very curious about and wanted to do some follow-up, and he offered to come on and let us interview him. So with that, David, why don't you introduce yourself to those on my show that don't know who you are, and then we'll start talking.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm way up here in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. It's snowing right now. I don't know where you're at, but it's snowing here. And I dread the coming winter, but I dread it every year. Basically, I converted in 2009 from atheistic Satanism. I was an atheist for 25 years from the age of 14 because I was born and raised Protestant, but I lost my faith at the age of 14, became atheist of various different kinds. And near the end of 25 years of atheism, it got really dark. I was an atheistic Satanist and became a hard solipsist. And but by the grace of God, I found God again and became Catholic, entered full communion with the church for the first time on December 13th, actually, of 2009. I was confirmed by an auxiliary bishop here in Montreal. And I started a podcast in 2016. And I've interviewed probably 300 guests, and Craig was one of my guests. So that's the short version. If you have any other questions, you can dig deeper. But that's basically who I am, a convert to the Catholic faith.
If I recall correctly, you sort of as a child were in some sort of a non-denominational Christian faith. Is that right?
It's not non-denominational. It's actually a conglomeration of different denominations.
Okay.
It's the United Church of Canada, which is very liberal, and they have atheistic ministers now. Greta Vosper is one of the first and the most controversial. I interviewed her on my podcast, and she actually knows the minister who baptized me. Because she's from Kingston, Ontario, where I grew up. Nice lady, but she's an atheist, and she's very confused about about religion. Obviously, calling herself a Christian when she's an atheist. But yeah, so it's a very liberal Christian denomination up here in Canada, and it unites the Presbyterians, and I don't know what else. I'm not too up to scratch on the denominations in the non-Catholic world. But yeah, so that was my upbringing, loosely.
And I forget when you sort of had your conversion in 2009 or whatever, did you go directly to Catholicism or was there sort of some transition there from other churches?
Yeah, well, it all happened very, very quickly. I mean, I found God, and it's just like, wow, amazing. I'm so happy. I'm so happy to discover that I'm not God, that God is God. Just relieves the burden. And because I thought that I was God, which sounds silly and absurd to say, but a lot of people walking around are sort of de facto soft solipsists. They think, they serve their own will, they're doing their own will, and just self-seeking and selfish as I was. But I went that extra step further because I was into philosophy, and I labeled myself as a hard solipsist because I actually believed that I was a disembodied mind, the disembodied mind of God, and it was a very lonely, sad place to be. So when I discovered God through philosophy, through Rene Descartes in particular, that was the sort of the key, the straw that broke the camel's back. I was a generic monotheist, and I hated Christianity, I hated Jesus Christ, I hated the church. So I didn't want to be Christian. It's the last thing I wanted, but I couldn't really be a Jew. I couldn't pretend to be a Jew. I'm not a Jew. I kind of secretly wanted to be a Jew, but I'm not. Mm-hmm. And I've done the DNA work to figure out that I'm not a Jew. I'm not a Jew at all, sadly. But great reverence for the Jews. But I was sort of found myself being a de facto Muslim, because I was a Unitarian monotheist. I didn't believe in the Trinity or in the Incarnation. I also did not believe in the Quran or Muhammad, but I was just sort of a generic monotheist, and I felt compelled to worship this God that I had discovered, the one true God, the uncaused first cause, that than which nothing greater can be conceived, is just an internal hunger to publicly worship this God. So long story short, I ended up bumping into a Catholic monk at my place of work. He came in to get his computer repaired, where I was working at a computer repair shop at the time. And I struck up a conversation with him. I let him know very bluntly my situation, and he said that he would give me instruction, but not before he took me to the Mass. And he showed me the Mass, and that's what really made me melt my heart with respect to Christianity. That the mass, that was one thing. Also reading the Confessions of Saint Augustine. So it was a quick journey from generic monotheism, dabbling with Islam, which I never really bought into, but seeking somewhere to worship, and then by providence finding the Catholic Church and entering the full communion and accepting the teaching, the private instruction that I got, accepting it almost with a supernatural ease, just studying, reading, and just accepting, saying yes, 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 yes to all the dogmas and all the teachings of the church, because they were not contrary to reason. Some of them were beyond my reason, but not contrary to reason. So I accepted everything, and it's just a beautiful thing. And I'm still madly in love with Christ and his church today.
So we talk a lot about moral issues on our show, and you and I are going to talk quite a bit about that in a bit. So I assume, and maybe I shouldn't make assumptions, but I assume prior to your intellectual conversion, when you consider yourself, let's say, an atheist or whatever, did your moral life or lack of a moral life reflect that? Or how would you characterize your moral relationship with sex and your body and all that kind of stuff?
Well, I was like a guilt-ridden, compulsive masturbator for my whole life. It's just like, that's just the way it is. It's just sad, but true.
Mhm.
And I don't think I'm the only one. As part of the reason I talk about it on the podcast and here on yours, I'm glad to talk about it, is just because,
Yeah.
I discovered pornography at an early age. And it's just like the demons of lust, they pester you. And even now as a Catholic, from time to time, I do fall prey to the suggestions and the temptation, because the world's full of suggestive images of sexy women. So yeah, that's something I've struggled with my whole life. But by the grace of God, becoming Catholic, obviously there was a big change. I got a lot of graces and was able to avoid that for the most part. So that's been a real boon, a real blessing. And so that's the major difference. That's the major challenge for me, is lust and gluttony and sloth or laziness, pride, of course. And I struggle with all of it, to this day. But by the grace of God, with prayer and the sacraments, it's better than it was. So yeah, if you looked at my life beforehand, I mean, there's some pretty embarrassing things that I was doing, on all counts. Just so, I mean, I don't want to say that I'm a saint today, that I'm not a selfish sinner. I am, but there is an improvement by the grace of God. To the extent that I've cooperated with the graces, there's been some improvement. But what do I have that I've not received? I can't boast. I can't boast. And there hasn't been much progress, but there's been significant progress. So I hope that answers the question.
So when you were intellectually, let's say, an atheist, did you experience like moral guilt and frustration over that?
Of course,
So why is that?
of
Like,
course,
I'm just
of
genuinely
course.
curious. If someone believes that we're just animals and there's no God, there's no afterlife, like what about, let's say, masturbation, for
Yeah.
example, whatever you want to call it? What was the source of shame for you if you had no concept of God or good and evil? Can you help me understand that?
Because we don't really believe in atheism. We don't really believe it. We never really believe in it.
Hmm.
It's just a stupid story. It's just a stupid story that we tell ourselves, and we don't believe it. We don't believe it. And we hope other people will believe it, but we don't believe it.
Okay.
Okay? Talk to any atheist, if you get to know them, and if you're in the foxholes with them in World War III, you're going to find out this so-called atheist is not an atheist. That's just the way it is. That's reality. That's reality. So it's just like what Socrates said. Learning is just remembering, right? Learning is nothing more than remembering. It's just like, oh yeah, I'm not God. God is God. Yeah, I knew that. Why was I drunk with this pride for 25 years as an adult? Why was I wasting my life, wasting my time, and serving myself rather than serving God? That's the conversion story, right? It's like, oh yeah, God is God. I knew that. So I think it's the same. Talk to any atheist that converts to God. If they're honest, if they're in touch with themselves. I mean, maybe I'm more introspective, and because I was a loner all my life and introspective, maybe I'm just more in touch. But maybe some people aren't even aware of that. But I was certainly aware of that at my conversion. That the whole thing was a sham. It was a lie. The whole atheism thing is a lie. Obviously, it's not like competing truths. Like pick your truth. You have your truth. I have my truth. No, there's one truth. It's God is real. That's it.
So you were a sort of an unsettled atheist, I guess, maybe is the way to describe it. You consider yourself an atheist, but in your heart, you really didn't align with that.
Yeah, there's a nagging, right? Like God is going to nag you. Even now as a professing Christian, God hasn't stopped nagging me. He's going to keep nagging me. It's not once saved, always saved. It's like I have to work out my salvation with fear and trembling. The nagging will continue.
Mhm.
And God, if you're listening, I know you are, keep nagging me, nag me harder, nag me, nag me harder, daddy. It's like I need it. I need to be nagged into sainthood. So it's the same thing with the atheist. He's just on an earlier phase of his journey. And when I was an atheist, that's where I was at. And God was nagging me then, he's nagging me now. And it ain't over yet, and I'm not pure. I can't stand before God. So I've got to do my purgatory now or later. I'd rather do it now. So that's where I'm at in my journey.
So I want to, and I want to respect whatever boundaries you have here, but one of the reasons I want to talk to you is your sort of irregular state. So in 2009, when you had your conversion, were you married then at that time?
Yeah, I got married in 95. And I was married in the courthouse by a judge who happened to have the name Pope. It was Judge Pope. Okay,
Ah,
so
that's close enough.
so I got married by the Pope. Okay, so
Okay.
so yeah, we were both agnostic or atheist or whatever. I mean, we didn't talk about it. We never talked about it because it wasn't a priority. It's not like, hey, I'm a Christian. Yeah, so am I. Let's get married. No, it wasn't like that. It was like, hey, you're cute. Yeah, you're cute. Like we can't live without each other. Let's get married. It's just very animalistic, and we're soulmates. We really are. So yeah, we were. There was no hint of like one of us is going to become religious. So she's very annoyed in 2009 that I became religious, and she's very, very, very anti-Catholic. And I do talk about this openly on my
Mhm.
podcast. I don't want to talk too much about her, but she's anti-Catholic, and she's very proud to be anti-Catholic, and she's culturally Greek Orthodox, and whatever. There's a cultural animosity there, and from their side towards us. I mean, I certainly hope the Catholics
Yeah.
aren't antagonistic towards the Orthodox, because it's a beautiful religion. I mean, it is schismatic, but it's a beautiful religion, and they're very, very close. So, I've been to Orthodox Divine Liturgy. I love it. I've participated in that, and but she will never set foot in a Catholic church. So that's a point of contention, and yeah, so that's a problem.
And you're still married. You're still married. This is the only marriage you've had,
Yeah,
and you have no children, I think you said.
no children. Yeah.
So, all right. So I assume you lived and acted like married people up until your conversion then. So you know what an intimate relationship is like and all that, right? It's not
Well,
completely forgotten.
I like to say what I like to say is that I'm the most pathetic of men, because I'm not a virgin, but I've never
Yeah.
had sex. I'm not a virgin, but I've never had sex. Okay. I'm not a virgin, but I've never had sex. Okay. Can you figure out what the riddle here? Do you understand? Do you understand what
Maybe.
I'm saying?
I
Okay.
think I do.
It's
Um,
just, okay, I'll explain it. Um, I'm by nature, in my fallen nature, I'm a masturbator. So it's like I've masturbated into women,
yeah.
but I've never had sex, because sex is a holy Catholic sacred thing, right?
Mhm.
So I've never had sex. I've never had sex,
In the
and
way
it's
that the
a
church
shameful
designs
thing.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, like I mean, there are Catholic couples today. Sadly, I'm not going to name them, and I don't know who they are, but I'm sure there's some out there who do a sort of mutual masturbation together, and it's not sex, right? It's not sex. So my bar is very
Mm.
high, because I understand what the church teaches about the marriage act. And I'm sure that a lot of Catholic couples are very pious and devout, and they have sex. That's amazing. But other couples, sometimes maybe they have sex, sometimes it's just mutual masturbation. And so in my case, I've never had sex, because I'm a masturbator. I'm just like a sick pervert. So that's where I'm at. Maybe some people would want to rush to my defense and say, no, you love her, and it was a beautiful expression of love and whatever. It's like, no, it wasn't. It was never like that for me. It was
Is
never
it just
like
because
that.
it was? Is it just because you were never open to life? Then is that the distinction you're drawing?
Well, I was open to life. I was open to life. I've always been open to life,
Hmm.
you know. I've always been against contraception. I've always been against abortion, like even as an atheist. Okay. But the women that I've been with, and I've only been with 4 women,
Hmm.
um, they were not open to life. So
Hmm.
it takes two to tango, you know. And luckily, I've never been involved in an abortion or a pregnancy. And so, as far as I know, so God spared me that sin, but I've got plenty of other sexual sin on my back, you know. And I've been to confession, obviously, general confession, and these sorts of things. And so it's like I don't feel burdened by it. I sleep well at night, but it's just like once a sinner, always a sinner, like that. I have the temporal punishment due to sin that I have to live with, and that's why I try to remember the indulgences to try to unburden myself of that. But the main thing is to stay in the state of grace, you know. And so to make a long story short, it's really messy and ugly, the whole relationship that I have with sex, because of pornography, because of I was introduced to that young, and just because of the whole escapism tendency I have into fantasy land, and because the demons know my mind, you know. They know that I'm a sick pervert, and they could just send some images to me or tempt me in different ways, and it's like one of the easy ways for them to attack me. So I think a lot of men probably are vulnerable to that. I don't hear a lot of people talking about it, but more and more on the internet, there are men that are sort of open and talking about the sorts of things.
Well, we try to talk about some of the real stuff, I guess. I don't I guess I don't feel as paranoid about it necessarily, but I guess I haven't had maybe some of the struggles that you've had in the past. Um,
Yeah.
I- this is more of an observation than a question for you, but feel free to chime in. My impression is I come across more folks such as yourself and others who have would say a sexual past that they're very, very ashamed of, seem to gravitate towards a very rigid and sort of traditionalist
Yeah.
moral mindset that I'm not saying is wrong,
Yeah.
but really, and I don't know if there's a psychological thing there, or that's just I don't know how to explain that other than I see it over and over and over again. Do you think that is that your experience, or what would you say to that?
My you know, remember you asked me about like why did I have moral qualms about masturbation as an atheist, and
Hmm.
you know, my answer was because I knew in my heart that God is real and there's objective morality. It's the same thing, you know, when you ask me today about why I cling to the sort of what seems like maybe stodgy or stuffy
Hmm.
or old-fashioned sexual morality. It's because I just intuitively know that God is pure and purity is important. And I've read the lives of the saints, and you know, I've read about the apparitions and sexual sin, how it leads people to hell. And I just know I know it's true. You know, like I mean, could I be wrong? I don't think so. Like I mean, could I be? I'm more convinced about sexual morality, the Catholic sexual morality. I'm more convinced about that than I am about the Trinity and the Incarnation. So I'm more convinced of the natural law. You know, homosexual acts are wrong, masturbation's wrong, adultery's wrong. I'm like 100% certain about that. I'm not 100% certain about my Christian faith. I'm not. So the sexual stuff is absolutely true to me, and nothing can shake that. Nothing. You know, even if you tried to convince me that I'm just an animal, I'm just an ape, and we evolved, and the apes do, you know, kinky stuff, and so should we. It's like I'm never going to buy that. I'm never ever going to buy that. It's wrong. I know that it's wrong. You know what I mean? It's like I know that God is real, and I know sexual morality is objective, and that God is pure. You know, nothing impure can stand before God. So I have a really, really, really hard line on that, and is I don't know how to convince someone else who has given themselves more license. Like if you're a little bit softer on yourself, I don't know how to convince you. I'm not interested in convincing you either. It's just this is what I know, and I'm not obsessed with it. But when I am tempted, or when I stray, or when I fall, it's like it's very, very real for me. It's like the gaping jaws of hell open beneath me, and I'm hanging by a thread. Like it's very, very dramatic for me. So,
Yeah, that's probably where you and I are a little bit on opposite ends of the spectrum. Like, so I got the Catechism here. Jonah and I talk about this all the time. We talk about 2352. It's tabbed on here. That's the masturbation chapter. I know it well. I accept it because the church says it's
yeah,
true,
yeah,
but I cannot reason my way towards that. Like, the only reason that I accept the fact that moral principle may be true is because the church says it.
yeah.
I would never reason my way to that. And maybe that's because I've never had, I mean, I think it's a very, very common thing that people have. I never had this childhood issue. It's just,
Okay.
uh, so maybe I think the history maybe affects it. I look at it just as a much more pragmatic thing. Like, I know when it happens when we're just abstaining for an extended period of time. That's kind of what happens. I don't. So I have kind of a love-hate relationship with that chapter, and that, like, if someone told me, Craig, you're going to find out tomorrow there's one teaching that the church has long held that's wrong, but I can't tell you what it is, I would put every single penny I had on 2352 being wrong. Now, as a Catholic, I'm already a heretic for even suggesting that something could be wrong, and I'm not. But I have the complete opposite perspective on it, in part because I see it as something that's extremely common. I see the type of tortured experience people such as yourself and others have over it, because it's nearly impossible to stop. Nearly, I think, for the average person. The amount of spiritual bandwidth and emotional bandwidth that people devote to this thing, that I think is in many ways not a spiritual issue, it's much more of a biological issue than anything else, perplexes me, because the confession lines are full of people. Great. I mean, great. Let's go to confession, but we have a lot of anguish over this, and I see guys over and over praying, begging for God to deliver them from this, when I just don't see it being such a spiritual issue that it is. And maybe that's my own blindness. I don't know.
Well, what about women? I'm always curious, because uh, it seems like a guy thing, because
Mhm.
the guy just wants to sow his seed everywhere, and like, I mean, it's ridiculous, the impulse that we have. But I don't know what women want. Like, what are they like? I guess they're fantasizing and they're masturbating and stuff. But I mean, it's not intuitive to me. Like that they're plagued by the same sort
They're
of
not. So
desire.
I forget if we interviewed Father Dwight Longenecker,
Okay, nice.
and I think it's around episode 140 or so. It was right around the time that you and I talked. Maybe he was before or after. I'm very proud of that episode. I thought we had a really, really good conversation with him. So if anybody comes to our channel and watches no other episode, go to the Father Longenecker one. And we asked him about this, and he said, in his experience, about 50% of men go into confession confess masturbation. And I suspect that's on the low side, to be honest. And then he said of women, it's about 1 in 20, and that might be an overestimate.
We got 10 times the amount of.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I mean, I think biologically we just function very different.
Yeah.
The biological experience of sex and sexual buildup is very different. Um, I'll give you a real world personal example here. So my wife and I, we're getting up there in age, and we're learning a new natural family planning method,
Okay.
because we have 9 kids, and we're kind of ready for that to be the end of the story for us.
Okay.
Obviously, you're always open, but we've had 9. We've done our part. But we're in our middle age now, and I've been on the no-fly list for over 30 days now, which I know
That's your
that
code
doesn't seem like a
That's your
that,
code language.
yeah.
Okay.
I know that probably doesn't mean much to you, poor guy,
No.
but that's a long time for me. For my wife, it's yeah, I mean, it's just not the same suffering, not even close to the same suffering.
Well,
Um,
it's a personal question, but do you ever
yeah,
get nocturnal emissions, wet dreams?
I am not. I don't remember having one before since I was a teenager.
I still get them to this day. I've always had them my whole adult life.
That's because your body is meant to expel
It's
this
doing
stuff.
it's doing its thing. It's doing its thing. I mean, less and less as I'm 53 now, so less and less. But and the funny thing is, if I have an erotic dream or whatever you want to call it, there are two kinds. One is like completely demonic and sick and perverted, and the other kind is with my wife. Like it's like she's the subject of my sexual
Hmm.
fantasies. Which is
Hmm.
kind of cool. It's kind of cool thing.
Hmm.
uh it shows that I'm attracted to her, because she sometimes accused me that I don't find her attractive, because
Hmm.
I'm we're
Hmm.
living like brother and sister since I converted. So that's really painful for her. So I like to let her know, like, oh, I had a wet
Yeah.
dream, it was about you. So
Yeah, I mean, let me. I don't know. We've got some guys coming on the show that have had this really major struggle in the past, and then say that they completely eliminated from their life. Um, you know, I'll just Jonah and I. So Jonah's my co-host, and we've made this observation, and we've kind of gone through this issue with our marriages, and had a very open and frank conversation with our wives, um, where both of our wives in response basically increase frequency of intimacy, and both of us can state very confidently that if you have intimacy on a relatively frequent basis, it's a solo stuff is complete non-issue.
yeah.
It's only if I mean, your body has a timetable. Your body's like, okay, it's kind of like you go a certain length of time without a meal, your body lets you know that. You go a certain amount of time without urinating, your body's going to tell you that. This is no different for guys. Now, maybe there's a spiritual component to that, but I just see it as a very biological reality, and that's where I struggle with the amount of moral guilt that guys go through, because um, why does the devil wait 4 days or 5 days or whatever your timetable is to tempt you? Because there's literally no temptation at all until you get in. I'm in a third, like I said, I'm on the 30 and anal fly list. It's been really, really hard. It's not a problem if it's 2 or 3 days after my wife and I have been together. So that part of it makes me think it's far more biological than and I really just approach it from the standpoint of just understanding how our bodies work and understanding it. And if you're looking for a solution and you're just pouring all your energy into a spiritual response, that may be why people aren't getting results, because I don't think it's as much a spiritual issue as a physical issue.
I disagree. I think it's a completely spiritual issue.
Yeah.
And I have the lived experience. Like, I have the
Yeah.
lived experience of the graces that I got at my conversion. And it's only when COVID shut down my churches here in Montreal, which I did strongly disagree with that decision, that stupid worldly decision
Hmm.
to deny me access to the sacraments. That's when I started falling again. But I went like 11 years. I won't say like no problem, but I didn't masturbate. It was like, and it wasn't because I didn't find women attractive. It's just that I was in the grace of God, and I had prayer in the sacraments, and it wasn't an uh, unmanageable burden. Like, I mean, I still find women attractive, and they're everywhere, like on the billboards, on TV, on the internet, wherever. It's like, you got tits and ass in your face all the time, and it's pleasant to look at, if they're a shapely woman. But it's a very spiritual thing, and you know the I always put it in the context of the Ten Commandments, and in particular the first commandment and the ninth and 10th commandments. It's all about, well, the ninth in particular. The ninth commandment is intimacy. It's like, don't covet your neighbor's wife, and I take that very seriously. And we're supposed to have that intimacy, reserve that intimacy for Christ and His church. It's like, and it's a real thing. Like, we really can have the satisfaction of intimacy without whacking off to some cheap demonic porn. Like, you really can. I don't want you to sell yourself short and think, well, it's just biology and I just gotta, get my rocks off or otherwise get a blue balls or whatever. No, there's a real intimacy to be had with God. And I firmly believe that. You can't convince me otherwise. And read the lives of the saints, you know?
Well, except that I'm not making a blanket statement here, but I think if someone is engaging in those acts, sort of, you mentioned sometimes your wife is the other character in the dream, and sometimes it's someone else. I mean, yeah, lust is a sin. Like lusting after someone else is a sin, but if that assumes that it's always with someone else, if the person that's occupying your mind when you're engaging in that is your wife, you're not lusting. You're not. Now, you maybe you're violating 2352, but it's not always lust. It's not always you're not always using pornography to do that.
Yeah. That's true. But and I think about that rock guy, that punk rock guy. What was his name? From Black Flag.
You're gonna get no help from me
Yeah,
because I'm just a
okay.
country
Anyway, it
Midwest
doesn't
boy.
matter. It doesn't matter. He had an interesting quote about masturbation that I found interesting, but I won't go there. But in any case, I think about Tobit, in the intertestamental Old Testament book there. Um, when he made that prayer, he got together with his new wife and they were going to consummate the marriage. And he made that prayer like, this is not for lust. We're not doing this for selfish lust. It's let me see if I can find. Now, Lord, you know that I take this wife of mine not because of lust, but for a noble purpose. Call down your mercy on me and on her, and allow us to live together to a happy old age. So it's that kind of that's the kind of intimacy that I've never enjoyed. Like I've never prayed that before being intimate with any woman, not even my wife, But I wish I had. I wish that I had that purity of heart. I wish I had that faith. And some Christians have that. They have that, by the grace of God. So that's the goal. That's the dream. That's the dream. That's the dream. And I think you're selling yourself short by setting the bar lower than that. And it's not to criticize you. I love you, and I've got nothing but charity for you. But I think you're selling yourself short if you set the bar any lower than that. Period.
Well, unlike you, I've enjoyed a 20 plus year marriage relationship where we've always been open to life. We've never used birth control. We've used natural family planning. I mean, we have a valid marriage as far as I know. I have a beautiful relationship with my wife, and I love my children, but there is a side of this that I think is far more difficult than I thought it would be. And was sort of led to believe. And that's kind of what we talk about here. The stuff that you talk about, like when I was a single guy, I didn't like this last month, being sort of on the no-fly list has been far more difficult than it was when I was a single guy. Yeah, you have your imaginations. Once you've sort of your body and your brain and everything, you're one flesh with this person now, and now you can't like you call it temptation. I don't care what you call it, but the urge and the pain that goes with abstinence is far more ferocious and painful than I ever experienced as a single guy. I tend to think that if you are not actively intimate with someone, whether you're single or celibate or whatever, I don't think your experience is the same because you're not.
Yeah.
You're not tasting. You're not drawing for the water every so often.
Yeah. I understand. I agree with you. 100%. So yeah, I sympathize with. Well, I don't sympathize because I've never been there, but I can imagine that it's hard, and so my heart goes out to you.
Well, you don't have to feel sorry for me. I mean, you got a far worse than
problem. First world problems, right? It's like
yeah. I mean, so okay. So if I could, do you consider yourself not validly married then? Is that why you live as brother and sister then?
Yeah, it needs to be regularized by the church, and it's very quick and easy and painless and free of charge. Like I found priests who will regularize it in 15 minutes for free of charge. but where there's no will, there's no way, and my wife's not willing. So that's it. She's put up the roadblock, and she just wants me to leave the church, and that's not going to happen. So
Well,
it's like a game of chicken, right? So it's like I'm never gonna leave the church, never. Like, I mean, if you want to divorce me, fine, whatever. I'm not gonna cave. Never gonna cave, never.
well, just so I'm clear, like canonically, you would be free if you wanted to marry someone else, right? You're from a canon law standpoint are not married.
I don't know. I don't know. I talked to 10 priests and bishops, and I got 10 different answers. So I'm erring on the side of caution, and I'm just doing you know, what I think is the safest thing, which is to live like brother and sister.
Mhm.
That's the basic advice I got when all is said and done. Now, in terms of, oh, can you get an annulment and get remarried and all that thing? Yeah, I got that advice that's possible. It's not what I want though. She's This woman is my soulmate.
Yeah.
Like, I can't live without her. You know what I mean? So it's like that's not an option. Even though I've been advised by priests and bishops that that is an option, but it's not an option for me because I'm not interested in that.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting otherwise. I give you credit for that.
And I don't want to start pumping out babies at age 53. Like, I'm 53 now. I mean, I'm not going to start pumping out babies.
I'm not far behind you, and I got a 1-year-old. You can do it.
Well, I'm way more lazy than you are. Way more selfish and lazy than you are. I think there's another part of this, which is divine providence. Like, God knows me, and he allowed me to find my way into this crappy situation, and that's the crappy situation I'm in, and I accept it. You know.
Well, so let me ask if I can, because what intrigued me about your situation, and I did an episode on this a few months ago. I was critical of Taylor Marshall and sort of those that are extremely hard on, let's say, divorced and remarried people that are in an irregular marriage and are basically told, and rightly so, I guess, you know, you got to live as brother and sister. What fascinates me about that is, you know, for a lot of people, and you know, you were married. I mean, I'm guessing, and you know, if you were a Catholic like you are now, back when you were single, you probably would not have married this woman because you would want to marry someone that wanted to be a Catholic and
Yeah.
have a sacramental marriage, right?
Yeah.
You committed to this person, and God bless you for staying with her. You know, at a time in your life where the faith was not part of your life. You weren't, you know, you were young and dumb, whatever you want to call it, be prideful. You know, you made some mistakes in your life, and you're still living with the consequences of that, essentially.
Thanks for reminding me.
Yeah, I don't know how else to say it, but
yeah, there's one thing I want to interject here. You didn't mention, is that we're both baptized Christian. We're both validly baptized. So that's something that enters into the equation when the hierarchy and the clerics try to unravel the situation. Like, what's the status of our marriage and how can it be regularized? It's like, we're both baptized. So
well, that was the part. Yeah. So before we got on here, that was the part I was trying to figure out, because I know oftentimes people that are Catholic get married outside the church can easily get an annulment because their marriage couldn't have been valid because they were Catholic. But for people that are not Catholic and get married under various circumstances, that marriage may be enforceable because for them it's enforceable. And I didn't, and so I was thinking, well, maybe, like, I don't understand why you couldn't be married if you are married in the church's eyes, but you got to get it you're saying you got to get it regularized.
Yeah, it just needs to be regularized, and she needs to swear that she is open to life, and she's not open to life. She's not, even at her age. I mean, it's sort of practical.
Yeah.
It's a moot point at this point, but but she's so turned off now by the fact that I'm Catholic. She's not interested anyway in doing the deed. She's not interested because she's grossed out that I'm in bed with the Pope. Like she thinks the Pope's the Antichrist. Like, she just wants nothing to do with, you know, with all that. Like, why is the Pope in the bedroom and all these sorts of things? I understand. You know, I understand. Like, if after however many years of marriage, my wife came out to me as a Scientologist, I'd be like, what the hell are you doing? You're crazy, and that's gross. You know what I mean? So I can understand it, because that's kind of how she sees my religion, even though she's culturally Greek Orthodox, which isn't that far, but and they do revere the Bishop of Rome as the first among equals, and that he has primacy of dignity and all these sorts of things. Like there's a lot of reverence for the Bishop of Rome in the Orthodox Church, but she doesn't want to hear that, you know.
So if she should have a change of heart in the future, then I assume you'd revisit that issue and consider
Yeah,
getting
oh
a
yeah,
marriage.
oh yeah, that would be amazing. Pray for me. Pray
Pray for
for
her,
her.
apparently.
Yeah, well, pray for me that she converts.
uh, okay, all right. Well, so so I'm curious then. So kind of getting back to what I said before about, I think one of the things that Jonah and I talk about on our show a lot is I think celibate priests that have never been in an intimate relationship with anyone, because they're saying, "Oh, I've gone without sex for
Ah,
40 years. Surely
yeah.
you can handle 30 days, my friend." And I don't know that the experience is the same. You've been on both sides. You've been in a intimate relationship, and now you've been on the permanent no-fly list. Does it get easier over time? Was it harder at first? Can you tell us about that?
It was easy. It's pretty easy most of the time because even though I'm a sick pervert and compulsive masturbator all my life, it wasn't it wasn't out of control. Like I mean,
Mhm.
and even in our marriage, and even when I had my other okay, there's one girl, my first love, or what do you want to call her. I mean, that was just like totally sick and perverted sex for the sake of lust.
Mhm.
But with the other women, I mean, it's just like I'm very prudish. Like I don't want to have sex all the time, you know. So it's like maybe I'm not a full-blooded man like you want to have sex all the time. I wasn't like that. I was never like that,
Hmm.
you know. So my appetite is lower. Yes, I'm a sick pervert. Yes, and I can have all kinds of ideas, not only about sex, but about violence and everything else. Like I can have all kinds of ideas. Like that's just the fact that I grew up, living in my head, and it's like the devil's playground, you know. So yeah, I'm a sick pervert, but I'm not exactly like high appetite for sex. So that's never been a big problem. So, in
Hmm.
a way, it's like I'm lucky, I guess you could say,
Hmm.
that you know even though like I said, I still have wet dreams periodically, and the ladies still catch my eye, and I try to avert my eyes and have recourse to prayer. I like the idea of sex, but when it comes to actual sex, it's like I'm not that interested.
Hmm.
Really, I'm not that interested. Like the demonic fantasies for me is a lot more. That's where I would go rather than having sex all the time.
Do you think that's who you are? Is that a sort of an ongoing byproduct of your past days with masturbation and porn, where it's just kind of distorted your view a little bit?
Yeah, it's not healthy. It's not
Hmm.
healthy. It's not healthy. Read the Old Testament. Not that they were all healthy either, but I mean, manly men who are doing stuff and active and normal. They have large families, and it's natural.
Hmm.
I'm unnatural. I'm perverted. I'm
Hmm.
distorted because of this. I want to blame society, blame Satan, blame everyone else, but it's basically because I'm weak. Weak and bad formation. Whatever you want to call it. I don't know, but you could blame you know intergenerational curses and dark stuff or whatever. You could point your finger in 1,000 directions if you want to assign blame, but basically at the end of the day, I'm not going to go to hell for anyone else's sins. If I go to hell, which God forbid, it's because I chose, like, so it's at the end of the day, it's selfishness. So yeah, it's not if people are looking for an example of like, oh, I'm very chaste and pure, it's like, don't look to me. Don't look to my example, you know. But there are manly men out there who are chaste, and they're having sex with their wife. It's amazing. That's where it's at. That's where it's at. Either be married and be having sex and be normal and healthy, or and that's a form of chastity. Or if you're celibate, if you're a priest, or if you're a religious or whatever, you can have the intimacy in other ways. Like I said, the intimacy is real, and it's better. It's better, as St. Paul says. It's better. It's better than marriage. Sorry, it just is. It's just better. But they're both incredible. They're both out of my reach. They're both you know, they're both beyond anything I've ever even dreamed of achieving. So, congratulations to you and to everyone else. But yeah, so that's how I see it.
You ever talk about the story of Onan?
Not too much, but yeah, I don't think it's right to spill your seed. You know,
So do you think God killed Onan because he spilled his seed?
I don't know. You know, I reserve judgment for a lot of the Bible stories. You know, the church, there are about 426 dogmas in here that I can't disbelieve. And you know, so there are 12,000 verses in the Bible, so 400 on 12,000 is not much of the Bible that's, you know, fixed by the church. You know, like there's a lot of room for interpretation. So I'm waiting for Judgment Day to figure out, like, you know, the alleged genocides and, you know, polygamy and all that sort of stuff. Like, who are the good guys, who are the bad guys, what was virtuous, what wasn't. You know, Moses allowed divorce, and then Jesus comes along and said, well, that was only because a concession because of your stiffness, you know, you're stiff-necked people, whatever. So there's a lot of stuff that's going to get explained to us on Judgment Day. I don't want to jump the gun and start interpreting using private judgment, leaning on my own understanding. But by natural law, I know that it's not good to spill your seed. And if God killed him, quote unquote, there are many ways of interpreting that. But you know, if he did end Onan's life there and then, it was a good thing to do. You know, either
For
he
spilling
allowed
his
it or
seed?
he ordained it.
For
Yeah,
spill
yeah.
Why? Why do you think it's a good thing that like God killed him for doing that?
Well, we need to put the horse in ahead of the cart, or whatever the expression is. We have to realize the principle that God is good, and whatever he ordains is good, and whatever he permits is permitted. It may not be good in and of itself, but the fact that it's permitted by God is good. So, you know, when we listen or when we see on Judgment Day what really happened with Onan, we're not going to be like, oh, this God that that I'm going to be with for eternity, his judgment's way off and he's not just and whatever. No, it's going to be like, wow, you're amazing, God. That was exactly what needed to happen, either by your permissive will or by your ordaining will, whichever way it played out, right? So, like, this is the thing about God. Like, he's all good and he doesn't make mistakes. And if he ordained the death of Onan, it was good. If he permitted it, then it may have been evil in and of itself, but the fact that God permitted it was to bring good out of that evil. So we'll find out on Judgment Day, basically. I'm not
I'd
worried
really,
about
I'd really like an answer sooner than then, but if that's what I have to wait, I guess I have to wait.
it. Your gut reaction is that no. It's like when God hardened Pharaoh's heart. It's like, you know, we understand that God allowed Pharaoh's heart to be hardened. He didn't ordain it; he permitted it. So it's maybe the same thing with Onan, if that helps.
Well, let me segue to this that kind of helps explain my point. Um, and are you familiar with, is it Father Casey? He's like a Franciscan YouTube star, TikTok star,
Young kid,
younger guy. He's younger than
I
us,
I
probably.
cringe when I watch him, so I'm uncomfortable watching him.
He's not your cup of tea.
No,
Why is that?
just most Catholic content, I just don't watch it. Just can't handle it.
Okay. Well, he see he got I've gone back and forth with him, but he did one on masturbation the other day. Well, it's been 6 months ago, but it just showed up in my feed. And he was, you know, of course, 2352 of the Catechism talks about it as being, let's see, what does it say? It's a disordered action, and it's intrinsically gray, like it's a grave matter, it's intrinsically evil, or whatever the case may be. Distinguishing that from example for killing someone. Like, killing someone is a serious matter, but it's not intrinsically evil, because sometimes there can be a legitimate reason to kill, self-defense, war, whatever. Like
Just war, just war.
just war, right? I mean, it's not, you know, 100% of the time
Yeah.
wrong. But masturbation is. And I
Yeah.
just find that
I'm starting to like this guy a lot more now.
yeah, but well, that so the rest of it you would hate because he was explaining
Oh,
about the whole, habit and how people
yeah, yeah,
keep.
I agree with that too. Yeah, obviously, the force of habit, and it's like, holy cow! Like, I mean, I've got that on my side for sure. Like, it's like, there are mitigating circumstances for sure, for sure, for sure. Don't. I hope I don't give the
There better
impression that
be.
you know. Yeah, yeah. Don't worry about that. I'm on your side for that.
Yeah, that's one of the things more on an intellectual level that I struggle with that the church is teaching on it, or well, let's just call it the church's teaching. Like it's probably the most common serious sin, not necessarily mortal sin, but let's just say a grave matter according to the church's standard. I'm sure everything else that you and I struggle with that rises to the level of a great serious matter is a distant second, like not even close. Like, I go down the
Yeah,
commandments, as a practicing Catholic, the first commandment, like I don't have any trouble missing mass. I don't have any trouble committing adultery,
yeah, yeah,
like everything else is. I've never even come close to wanting to kill someone, even though there could be moral situations where I could do it. But this act, the most common problem that guys probably have, even without porn,
yeah.
just I don't know. My mind just doesn't know how to grapple with that because I can't reason my way to it other than I know what the church says and I do my best to follow that.
Well, I wonder with someone that doesn't struggle with sexual sin, man or woman.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder what what is actually embarrassing in the confessional for them. Because I mean, I'm not embarrassed. I'm not embarrassed by my other sins. I'm not. I'm not. I'm not embarrassed that I'm selfish, lazy, glutton. I'm not. I'm not embarrassed by that. I'm embarrassed only by the sexual stuff. Only
I I don't know why that is.
because it's disgusting. That's why it's disgusting.
Well, and this is where and I'll put on my little heretic hat here or whatever. I mean, I think that there is this long-standing puritanical ick factor that we have for this stuff that like there aren't people getting up rising up saying, hey, I'd really like the church to revisit the teaching on masturbation or whatever. Like no one's going to stand up and do that, but it has that ick factor, but I think that ick factor really carries over into how we relate to it and how much, like I said, spiritual and emotional bandwidth we put into it. And maybe that's all justified. Like I'm not telling anyone not to worry about it, but it's hard for me not to observe that.
I have an important point to make here. It might help to bring you some deep-seated guilt and shame in the future.
Okay, all right, bring it on.
Uh, it's one of my sick hobbies is watching true crime or real crime, whatever it's called, and serial killers and all these types of people, cult leaders who make their Christian cults, and it's amazing to me how sex and violence go together always in these sick criminal minds. Always sex and violence, always sex and violence. And I am thoroughly convinced, just based on my own demonic fantasies that I've indulged in, that sex and violence go together. And when I say sex, I don't mean sex, I mean demonic lust. So because sex is chaste, sex is pure, sex is good. So I'm talking about what the world calls sex, what I call lust. It always goes together. So maybe you haven't watched enough serial killer documentaries or cult documentaries, but it's always there. It's always there. A little bit of license, a little bit more license, a little bit more license, and then before you know it, you're screwing everything that moves, and you got guns, and it's always the same. Satan is so predictable. It's so predictable.
Here's, and I don't necessarily disagree with that. And when we talked to Father Longenecker, so Father Longenecker is a former Anglican, and he talked about like the Anglican Church is a real mess. I think it was kind of on sort of on the leading front of the sexual revolution and getting rid of all the traditional Christian concepts of marriage and sexuality. And he talks about what a mess it is. And he really appreciated coming over to Catholicism and having kind of this, yeah, kind of the black letter law, so to speak, and whatever, but tempered by pastoral charity, I guess.
Yeah.
And I get all of that. Like I suspect that's what's going on, because I think you give people an inch, they'll take a mile. But I look at you, you spend more time worrying about your faith, I'm sure, than I do.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, and you're just, the way you talk about yourself and your situation, like the amount of energy and bandwidth you give to this, despite your clear, genuine desire to be a saint and to live a good and holy life, is where I struggle, because you are sort of collateral damage, so to speak, to protect us from sort of the slippery slope and all the other people out there that are not well intended, such as yourself, that will just take things to the extreme. That's my own that's what hurts me. It hurts me to see someone like you struggle so much when you're not the problem. It's the people that are going to get down the bottom of the slippery slope. And maybe there's no way to not open up the door to that. But if that's what it is, then let's just be honest about it. That to me makes more sense than, oh, natural law, and this is where the seed and all this. That is not very compelling to my mind. The slippery slope is, but I can't ignore the fact that you are suffering immeasurably, and I sometimes necessarily. You, I mean, I would be suffering in your situation.
No. I suffer only when I sin. Like that's the beauty of my approach, is that there's feedback. It's like when I fall short, I feel it. I feel it. You know what I mean? It's not like it's not like I've killed my conscience. Okay, my conscience is alive. It's sensitive. Okay, and thank God for that. Thank God for that. I'm very, very, very happy and grateful. I'm very happy and grateful, because I only suffer to the extent that I'm selfish. So that's excellent. I thank God for that. I thank God for that. I hope you have more of that.
Well, I guess what I would say is this. I think it's hard to separate sort of the guilt we experience by doing things we believe are wrong from the fact that it's because we believe they're wrong. Like if we didn't believe they're wrong, I don't know that I would have this.
But what does the church say? But what does
the
church say?
About what?
Open your catechism to 2, whatever it is.
2352.
2352. Open your catechism. What does the church say? What do the saints say? There's a battle on Twitter now. I don't know if you're following it, with Militant Thomas, and he's defending the sexual purity, like the teachings of the church on sexual morality, and sort of the rigorous position. And he's catching a lot of flack. Like people are saying, lighten up, and that's not, that's old fashioned, and that's not what the church teaches anymore, and whatever. He's like, and I haven't been following deeply, but I just sort of browse and see from time to time it pops up. But he's like, no, read the saints, and he gives us examples. It's like, it's very, very, very clear, and it's very important. Do we secretly wish that it wasn't so? Well, I don't secretly wish that it wasn't so. I'm very happy with Christ and his church, and the truth about sexual morality and purity. I'm very happy with that. I won't trade that for anything. So I don't want to, like, as you said, if you had to bet which one's going to change or which one changed, you put all your money on that one. I wouldn't, I'd put all my money on something else. Like, well, that death penalty thing, that's an issue that's controversial today. That seems more likely to change than the thing about sexual morality. But
well, I don't think it's going to change, because I'm not saying it's going to change, but if there's one that I think could be proven wrong, that's it. I mean, I guess here's what I would tell you. If the strong, right, rigid traditionalists, and I don't know, maybe that guy's got his own history. Like I said, I see a pattern of people that are very much Fire and brimstone people tend to be running from, I think they view this as a safety net for themselves against a history that they're ashamed of. But
yeah, yeah.
If those all the rules rigidly set are, I would tell every single one of my kids, do not get married, go live in the desert, don't have any human interaction with anyone else, because the risk is too the risk is too grave. Like that's sort of why I started this podcast, because I was so frustrated that this is so impossible. I had a good marriage, but I was miserable spiritually because this is just impossible to live out to every tittle of the law. I was in confession all the time and miserable, and I was like, if like this can't be lived out the way. Either the church is wrong, and my whole faith is shaken, or this life is impossible to live and no one should do it. Turns out that my marriage really changed dramatically and wonderfully through this, because my wife and I started talking about things that I was afraid to talk about before. So I have hope, but I don't know if those guys are all right. There's about 10 people in heaven, and the rest there can't be a married guy in heaven. I don't know.
I don't know if it's too soon to talk about this, and you'll correct me if you don't want to talk about it, okay? But it is relevant in my mind, and it's very touching. It's the story of Michael Voris and his homosexual tendencies. And I personally, I like him, warts and all, with all his flaws and whatever. I've always sort of sympathized with him. I think he's, I could see that he was struggling, because when you have a past like that, it just doesn't magically disappear. Okay. So I've always had sort of like a soft spot in my heart for him, even though I didn't disagree. I disagreed with a lot of his what's it called, the church militant. I found it a little bit too critical of the living magisterium for my taste, but and I didn't consume the media. I didn't really go out of my way to watch church militant. But when I first converted, I watched the Vortex and stuff like that. And several years ago, it came out that he was homosexual, or he suffered from SSA, and he got ahead of it and admitted it and whatever. And now sort of the chickens are coming home to roost and these sorts of things. The reason I'm bringing this up, we wish him well, we're praying for him. He may have bad intentions, and so we should pray even harder for him. But I think he believes, and I think he's trying to be a good son of the church, and he's just overwhelmed, by the demons of lust. Period. They've got a hold of him. So the reason I think it's relevant is just because we could put on the facade that everything's okay and we're good Catholics and this and that and the other thing, but only God knows the heart. And these things tend to linger, like from my childhood. It's like it's still lingering, and I thought that I'd moved past it, and then COVID hit and I didn't have access to the sacraments, and it came back, to a lesser extent, obviously. But so I just want to get your feedback on that sort of that reality, like that scary reality. It's like there's a spiritual battle, and we can lose. We're not guaranteed to win the spiritual battle. Like, we can lose the battle, so
Well, yeah, I had kind of been following that, and I think I knew there was suspicions about the reason for his departure, and it sounds like that's more or less been confirmed now. But a couple things. Number one, and I hope I can remember both of these, but number one, again, it's another example to me of someone who has their own demons they struggle with, that sort of overcompensates by going out.
The white knuckle chastity or whatever.
Yeah, I just see it. I see it so often, and maybe I have the same problem, but I'm not aware of. I guess I'm not aware of having that, but I see it very commonly. I used to feel that way. I used to be I consider myself a recovering traditionalist. I left for different reasons, but so, I guess his situation is another, I guess, example, the pattern I was talking about. But number two, the battle with the flesh, if that's what it is, like it is like we put ourselves in a battle with our bodies, and especially the sexual drive is extraordinarily strong. Like I've I can't, as a heterosexual man in a good marriage with with my wife, I don't know what it's like to have those types of feelings. But what I can say, just like I said, I'm having the last 30 days, not having intimacy with my wife has been really hard. If I had these same feelings for men, but because of my faith I could never act on it, it would be that would be an enormous cross, I think. And so I have sympathy for those people because I know how tortured I am during the periods of time that we have to be abstinence for natural family planning reasons. If you have to go through a lifetime of that, and it's kind of one of the reasons that I was curious about your situation is having to kind of go through that indefinitely. I have I'm not here to judge those people. I have great sympathy for those people, in part because I know how weak I am or how difficult it is for me in short stretches of time to be, you know, basically never able to express yourself in the way that your body or whatever. I don't ascribe to the idea that it's like people can change. I mean, it is the way people are. The church says you can't act on it, okay, but I have great sympathy for people that carry that cross, because that seems like an enormous cross to me, and I don't know that I would ever have the strength to carry that perfectly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's so that's part of why I guess I don't know if I'm softer on this stuff than maybe you are, but I have a real recognition of, having spent 20 years really doing all the things, praying all the things, and never really, mastering this, although it's much better now than it's ever been, and mostly because my relationship with my wife is so much better. Um, I have a lot of I think there are a lot of people out there, kind of getting back to what you said about the facade. I think every guy I talk to that's in my situation says the same thing, but no one talks about it. We secretly carry this burden ourselves. Our wives never know about it. We go to confession. I don't think priests are always all that well equipped to counsel guys, because I don't think they necessarily understand what's really going on and what isn't going on. So that's kind of why we have this show, is to, make it okay for guys to talk about it, to not to say it's okay, but just to talk through the issue and understand a little better, and if possible, improve your marriage, because that fortunately happened for us. We've had other people call in that have been blessed with better marriages because of some of the topics we talked about and they brought up with their spouses. So that's what we do. That's what motivates me.
Can I ask you, mind if I ask a question before we wrap up? Because I do have
Yeah.
another guest coming on.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, it's sort of a dark question, but in the course of the interviews you've done, how many interviews would you say you've done? A dozen or 100 or?
Not a ton of interviews. I think we're about episode 175. We've
Okay.
probably done 15. We don't do a lot of interviews.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. You just talk with your
Mostly
friend.
it's me and my buddy off screen here. Yep.
I see. Okay. So you don't have a huge pool to draw from, but I was
Right.
just wondering, I was just curious if you ever met anyone that in your mind shocked you because they went so far with giving themselves license, but probably that hasn't happened yet.
I have some friends of mine who are not Catholic. They're former Catholic, they're
Okay.
Lutheran, and they are kind of shocked by our teachings, and they don't have the same moral
Well,
restraints, I guess. And so we had we had a really nice conversation. We definitely disagree on things, but to be honest with you, the one that shocked me the most, and this episode is coming out this week. It's not an interview, but it's a conversation I had with a very traditionalist red pilled guy, uh, who said his solution to this was basically to assert the marital debt whenever he wanted, and I'm just not. That's not my thing, and you know, if that's the solution, is to just tell your wife, make herself available whenever you want, that's kind of a dark, but I think that is the response that some people take. That one bothered me a little bit, more so than someone that is sort of more on the the freedom and the liberalism part of
Uh-huh.
things.
I'm right there with you. I agree with you 100%.
Hmm.
Let's err on the side of you know being loose and free and respectful of the dignity of your spouse, please, for the love of God.
I would rather take my chances with 2352 than to have that kind of a
Yeah,
dominant relationship with my wife, but that's just
yes.
me.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, 100% guaranteed.
So
Yeah, I think that's the better side there. So, any final, how do you wrap up your interviews? Because it's your show.
yeah, that's kind of it. So let me do this, David. Is for people that want to follow your show or get in touch with you, what's the best way to do so?
Well, they can go to cvs-podcast.com, and it's not up to date, unfortunately. I'm really behind because I'm a one-man show.
Yeah.
I work full time.
Hmm.
But from there, you can get links to all my social media and everything like that. Or you could just go to my handle on YouTube. That's where everything's up to date. And it's at Catholic_verses, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just see what my channel handle is. I should know this.
You could search it. It comes
Oh,
up
it's
pretty good in
Catholic
searches.
verses. It's Catholic verses without an underscore. So that's at Catholic VS. So they can find me there and watch your interview that I did with you back in September, and
Yep.
hopefully I'll have your partner on. Is his name Jonah or Jacob or something like that?
Jonah.
Jonah. Hopefully he'll come on. I'd like to get his perspective.
Yeah, he has more limited flexibility than I do. But
Oh,
he wanted to be here, and he'd probably like to interview you too.
okay, okay,
But
okay.
yeah, no, it's just strange because like we were just acquaintances for a while. We were Catholic, our kids go to Catholic school together, but we had breakfast one day together, and I just kind of started chatting about this stuff, and we realized that we have a lot of the same internal struggles as married men, and that just kind of led. I said we got to start podcasting about this, because if we're not the only guys out there, there's more people that need to hear this.
Cool. Well, I hope your channel continues to grow, and hopefully some of my
Yeah.
I don't have a big audience, but hopefully some more of them will discover you and maybe even come on and talk to you. Like this is liberating thing. Like what you're doing is good, airing the dirty laundry and getting people thinking about it, talking about it. It's very important. So
Yeah, we have kind of an open invitation. So, people want to come on, and if they want to be anonymous or whatever, we got
okay.
ways to do that.
Oh, you should have told me that. I would have been anonymous today. I'm just kidding.
Well, I got the audio. We could just put the audio up there,
I'm
but
just kidding. I'm just
yeah.
kidding.
Yeah. So, well, David, I appreciate this. Maybe we'll do it again sometime. I really
Yeah.
was looking forward to this. So, otherwise, I'll wrap it up. So, thank you everyone for listening, and until next time, everyone, have a good one.